All right, so we're going to be reviewing the werewolf changes coming to the Elder Scrolls Online with the Gold Road chapter. We're on the PTS week 3, and we're going to go over what changed with werewolf. Is it meta? Is it not? Is it going to finally be good in PvP or PvE? Will it be just as good as it was or annoying as it was during 2020, during Greymoor to Stonethorn and Markheart DLCs? Who knows? So anyway, the main change to the Werewolf Transformation Ultimate, it's going to be mostly the same, but when you are a werewolf, your light and heavy attacks will now deal bleed damage. And it says right here on the tooltip on PTS, while transformed, your light attacks apply a bleed for X amount of bleed damage for over 4 seconds on the Berserker morph. Your heavy attacks deal 50% splash damage, and your max stamina is increased by 30%. And of course, both morphs will have, while slotted, your stamina recovery is increased by 15%. The Pack Leader morph, however, says, while transformed, your max stamina is increased by 30%, you take 10% less damage, and you summon 2 dire wolves. You also grant yourself and nearby group members minor courage, increasing their weapon and spell damage by 215. So instead of bleed damage on the Pack Leader, apparently, it's going to be just on the Berserker. Interesting. That's not what the patch notes said, but it's whatever. Hopefully, it's just a tooltip error on that note, and that both still afflict bleed damage through light and heavy attacks. These attacks also have a chance to apply hemorrhaging, with light attacks at 3% and partially charged heavy attacks at 5%, and fully charged heavy attacks at 10%, which, if you ever play Werewolf, that's kind of nice to have. The developer comment actually reads for this. Lacking a second ability bar, those of the beasts within them have a harder time interacting with status effects and have fallen a bit further behind in damage production than we'd like. We're throwing them a bone by letting these attacks have a small passive chance to apply them, while making their build paths slightly more diverse with status effect chance being a bit more enticing. 10% is actually not too bad. This won't be a silver bullet to solve their damage deficits, but werewolves don't like silver. Alright, so I'm going to go with, typically, let's go with Berserker. Why not? Typically for PvP, for a group or something, I would go Pack Leader. Why not? And then we do have a change to Roar. Roar, this ability and Ferocious Roar have now have a unique debuff called Terrified. So on the tooltip PTS, it says, roar with bloodlust to fear nearby enemies 4 seconds. So that's a CC for 4 seconds, which sets them off balance, guaranteed for 7 seconds, off of cooldown, and makes them terrified for 10 seconds. What does terrified mean? So terrified doesn't do anything other than mark the people you hit roar with. And then I guess that deafening roar is, while slotted, you gain major protection and your heavy attacks taunt enemies for 15 seconds. I think terrified had something else too. Yeah, I think it had to do with piercing howl, right? Where's piercing howl? So piercing howl used to deal 10% bonus damage to people who were facing you as a werewolf. But now they deal 10% more damage to people who are terrified by your roar. So this is your wombo combo as a werewolf going in the offensive. You roar, you CC them, you place terrified on them, and then you immediately follow up with a howl of despair or howl of agony. But I really want to look at the deafening roar morph here. Instead of granting you major protection just for slotting it, instead of granting you major prophecy and savagery for slotting it, you will now gain major protection for slotting it. And your heavy attacks taunt NPC enemies for 15 seconds. So this is a nice kind of, I guess, gift to werewolf players who want to tank on werewolves in PvE. For PvP, I mean, maybe it'll be nice to pull away the IC bosses. It will afflict major breach and minor maim on anyone you hit deafening roar with. And with ferocious roar, your heavy attacks are now 33% faster for 10 seconds after casting, and instead of major protection, you gain major savagery and prophecy. So this is like, okay, do you want more mitigation and more utility off of minor maim and major breach on targets? Or do you want, I guess, technically more DPS, but also more, I guess, offensive stats like major savagery and prophecy for your weapon and spell crit? You could cover this technically with potions. So that's really I guess, an open area for theory crafting with werewolf builds, but potentially for PvP, especially. So yeah, deafening roar, ferocious roar. I'll go with deafening roar. I feel like the major protection, if I were making a build right now, would be pretty solid for PvP. And the minor maim, not too bad. And I do need a bit more penetration. You know, you don't get weapon passives from being werewolf. So even if you have dual wield maces, you won't get penetration as a werewolf. And as someone said in chat earlier, the only weapon passive that works is the last bow passive. What was it? Hasty retreat for werewolf. Which is obviously a bug. And let's see. The next thing we're gonna kind of look at is going to be piercing howl. So piercing howl is over here again. Piercing howl, howl of agony. So howl of agony now deals 10% more damage to enemies that are terrified, and 10% more to enemies that are off balance. So that's both guaranteed to you as a werewolf if you use deafening roar or any morph or version of roar to mark enemies as terrified and to throw them off balance. So in the Howl of Despair is going to be you or an ally targeting the enemy can activate defeating frenzy synergy, which grants them empower and minor force for 20 seconds, which is, again, I don't think it's good for PvP because empower, if you remember, some time ago was changed to where it only affects monsters, not players. But you do get that 10% critical damage, which I don't think is worth it, really, when you compare it to Howl of Agony. For PvP or even PvE, I would definitely take 10% more damage to Terrified and 10% more. That's 20% more damage, assuming you can CC them and off-balance them. So I would take that, really. Any other changes to Werewolf, really, is... There really isn't any. That's it. We do have... I think there was some adjustments to Pounce, but if I read it correctly earlier... But I think that's it. I think Pounce was a couple patches ago in terms of like not it being considered a movement. It's just sort of like a gap closer. So it's for item sets that kind of like emphasize standing still. So there we go. If I were building a werewolf for PvP right now, I'd probably go with the... Oh man, it's a hard choice between brutal and feral. At times, depending on how many enemies are hitting you or how long you're in combat with, with a werewolf, for your duration as a werewolf. So, Brutal Pounce, weapon spell damage increases by 100 for each enemy hit. Are you going to take out multiple enemies in PvP? Or are you going to go for more sustain and extend your werewolf transformation? I don't think you can go really too wrong with either one, depending. And of course, with Hircine's Rage, Hircine's Fortitude, we get Major Berserk, which, you know, if I'm making a random casino build like this with, you know, 1-piece Nibane, 5-piece Daedric Trickery, 5-piece Kind Marchers, Satan Seducer, I do not think we need the Major Berserk at full health from Hircine's Rage. But I would take Hircine's Fortitude because it does give me the minor endurance and minor fortitude. So yeah. Infectious Claws, definitely Claws of Anguish for PvP. So, yeah, there we go. That's a werewolf. So I'm actually kind of curious, just before we end this, since we have like 3 sets that randomizes buffs and debuffs, I really want to see my character sheet. Oh, that is so bright. What? They could have done a bit more with the werewolf in terms of the skill adjustments, or even they could have done more things with Pounce, maybe, or Infectious Claws, / Claws of Anguish. But I think, again, it's come to this point where it's in a spot where it'll be more supported by the item sets rather than its abilities or passives or whatever. And I think we're going to see a repeat of maybe Greymoor or Stone Thorn with maybe a mythic combo with some of the items that we have in the game. So, yeah.